The wind moved slowly across the open land as evening settled over the small frontier town of Red Willow, carrying with it the smell of dust, dry grass, and something unspoken, and Nathan Cole felt that familiar weight in his chest as he guided his horse toward the edge of town where the buildings thinned and silence waited, for Nathan was a man who lived more in quiet than in words, a rancher shaped by loss and long days alone, and as he passed the old general store he noticed a woman standing near the hitching post, her figure still as if she had been placed there by the fading light itself, wearing a plain brown coat that was too thin for the coming night, her hands clasped tightly at her waist as if holding herself together, and though Nathan did not know her name or her story, something in the way she stood made him slow his horse, because she was not waiting in the way travelers waited for rides or supplies, but in the way someone waited for an answer they feared might never come, and when she turned her head slightly their eyes met for only a breath, yet that moment carried a strange pull, her gaze steady but tired, guarded but quietly hopeful, and Nathan felt an old ache stir, the kind he had buried since his wife passed 3 winters before, an ache he had sworn would never return, and still he rode on, telling himself it was none of his business, that the West was full of lost souls and unanswered prayers. But as he reached the dirt road leading out of town, he stopped, the silence pressing in, and before he could talk himself out of it he turned back, dismounted, and approached her with careful steps, his voice low and respectful as he asked if she needed help, and the woman seemed surprised, as if kindness itself had startled her, before she answered that her name was Eliza Harper and she had arrived on the afternoon train expecting to meet a man who never came, her words calm but hollow, and though she did not say more, Nathan understood enough. Because the West was full of promises written in letters and broken by distance, and he offered her water, then a place to sit, and then, after a pause heavy with unspoken thoughts, he offered her a room at his ranch for the night, no expectation, no pressure, only shelter, and Eliza studied his face as if searching for danger or false hope, yet all she found was quiet honesty and a loneliness that mirrored her own, and she accepted, because there are moments when the heart chooses before the mind can argue, and the ride to the ranch passed mostly in silence, the sky turning from gold to deep blue, the land stretching wide and empty, and Eliza watched the horizon as if trying to imagine a future somewhere beyond it, while Nathan wondered when he had last shared the road with someone else, and when they arrived the ranch house stood modest and worn, with a single lamp glowing softly inside, and Eliza hesitated at the door, unsure if she truly belonged in this place, but Nathan opened it and stepped aside, giving her space, and that simple act eased something tight inside her chest, and inside the house the air smelled of wood and old memories, and Nathan showed her a small spare room that had not been used in years, its bed neatly made but untouched, and as Eliza set her small bag down she felt the weight of the day finally catch up to her, yet she kept her composure, thanking him with a quiet sincerity that lingered after she closed the door, and later as they shared a simple meal in near silence, the kind that did not feel empty but careful, they learned small things about each other without asking too much, that Nathan had lived on this land most of his life, that Eliza had grown up back east where the streets were crowded and dreams felt closer than they truly were, and though neither spoke of pain directly, it hovered between them like a third presence, shaping every pause, and when the night deepened and Eliza retired to her room, Nathan remained at the table long after, listening to the house breathe, aware of how different it felt to have another soul under his roof, and sleep came slowly to both of them, Eliza lying awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if this kindness was temporary or the start of something she dared not hope for, while Nathan lay awake remembering the last time he had let someone close, the loss that followed, and the quiet vow he had made to never open that door again, and morning arrived pale and gentle, sunlight spilling across the fields as Eliza stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air, feeling for the first time in weeks that she was not being chased by disappointment, and Nathan watched her from a distance, struck by how naturally she seemed to fit into the landscape, and over the next hours they moved around each other with careful ease, sharing work and small conversations, laughter rare but genuine when it came, and yet beneath the calm something restless stirred, because kindness has a way of awakening feelings long asleep, and by afternoon Eliza confessed she did not know what she would do next. That her plans had ended at the train station, and Nathan listened, torn between the desire to offer more than shelter and the fear of offering his heart again, and when she asked how long she could stay, his answer was gentle but uncertain, and that uncertainty settled between them like dust in the air, unspoken yet impossible to ignore, and as evening returned and shadows stretched long across the land, Eliza stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the road that had brought her here. And Nathan joined her, neither speaking, both sensing that whatever had begun with a simple act of compassion was already asking something deeper, something neither of them was sure they were ready to give. And as the sun slipped below the horizon, Eliza wondered if this place was only another stop on a long road of letting go, while Nathan wondered if letting her leave would be a loss he could not bear. And in that quiet moment, with the wind carrying the promise of change, the future waited. Uncertain and tender, just beyond the fading light, the desert around Red Mesa shimmered under the hard sun when the widow arrived, her presence quiet yet unsettling, as if the land itself recognized her, and though no one could say exactly when her name first became a warning, it traveled faster than the wind through the town's narrow streets, whispered behind hands and beneath lowered hats. For Mara Ellison was known as the woman who loved men, marked for an early grave, a widow twice over. Before her 30th year, and when she stepped down from the stagecoach in her dark traveling dress, eyes shaded by grief and resolve, conversations thinned and doors closed, not from cruelty but from fear, because Red Mesa was a town that believed fate could be caught like a sickness, and no man wanted to invite it. Yet Mara did not come asking for welcome, only for space, and she purchased the small adobe house at the edge of town where the desert met the sky, a place long abandoned, its walls cracked but standing, and there she lived quietly, drawing water at dawn, tending a small garden that fought bravely against the dry earth, and keeping her gaze steady when others looked away, her sorrow worn not as weakness but as a kind of armor. And weeks passed with little change until one afternoon when the heat lay heavy and the cicadas cried out like restless spirits, and Mara heard a sound at her door that did not belong to the wind, a dull thud followed by a slow, uneven breath. And when she opened it she found a man collapsed on her threshold, dust-covered and bleeding from a gunshot to the side, his hat fallen away to reveal dark hair matted with sweat, his face pale but stubbornly alive, and Mara did not ask his name or his past, because she recognized that look too well, the look of a man who had walked too close to death and was not ready to follow it yet, and with steady hands she dragged him inside, closed the door against the sun, and set to work as if guided by instinct and memory, cleaning the wound carefully, whispering calm words though she did not know if he could hear them. And as hours passed and the man drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring fragments of regret and resolve, Mara felt that familiar tightening in her chest, the fear that came not from danger but from caring, and when at last the bleeding slowed and his breathing evened, she sat back, exhausted, staring at the stranger whose life now rested, at least partly, in her hands. And night came softly, stars appearing one by one above Red Mesa, and by morning the man woke with a sharp intake of breath, eyes opening to find Mara seated nearby, her expression calm but guarded, and he tried to sit up before pain forced him back down, a small sound escaping him that was half frustration, half relief, and she told him gently to stay still, her voice low and steady, and when he asked where he was she answered simply that he was safe for now, and that was enough, because men like him did not trust easily, but they understood honesty when they heard it. And over the next days he healed slowly, learning that his name was Jonah Pike and that he had come to Red Mesa chasing a job that turned into a trap, a familiar story in the West. And Mara listened without judgment, offering water, food, and silence when words ran dry, and though she never spoke of her past unless asked, Jonah learned enough from the town's quiet stares and half-finished sentences to understand the weight she carried. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in shades of fire and gold, he asked her if the rumors were true, if every man she loved had met a violent end, and Mara did not flinch or deny it, only nodded once, her eyes reflecting the dying light, and said that she did not believe love caused death, but she had learned it did not protect against it either. And Jonah considered this in silence, his gaze thoughtful, because he had known men who ran from danger and men who chased it, but he had rarely met someone who faced it with such quiet acceptance. And as his strength returned he helped around the house, mending fences, carrying water, doing small things that felt almost like a life, and in those shared moments something delicate began to form, not spoken, not promised, but felt in the way their eyes met a second longer than necessary, in the comfort of shared quiet at dusk, in the way Mara's laughter, rare and soft, surprised them both, and yet beneath it all lay the shadow of what might come, because Red Mesa did not forget its stories, and men noticed Jonah's presence, noticed the way he walked with purpose despite the injury, noticed the way he looked at the widow with something like hope, and warnings followed him like dust, friendly at first, then sharper, reminding him that staying meant inviting the same fate as those before him. And Jonah listened, because he was not a fool, but when he returned to Mara's house each evening, when he saw her standing in the doorway framed by sunset, he felt a pull stronger than fear, and Mara sensed the tension growing, the way Jonah's smiles faded when the town's whispers reached him, the way he grew quiet when the future was mentioned, and one night she told him he should leave when he was strong enough, not out of anger or rejection, but because she would not be the reason another man bled in the dust, and Jonah did not argue, but the sadness in his eyes cut deeper than any wound, and he said only that running had never saved him before, and that some things were worth the risk, and Mara turned away then, not trusting herself to answer, because hope was a dangerous thing, and days later trouble came as it always did, in the form of men Jonah had crossed, drawn to Red Mesa by unfinished business, and though violence brushed the edges of town like a gathering storm, it did not break openly, yet the danger was clear enough, and Jonah knew he had to choose between leaving to protect Mara or staying and facing what followed him, and on the morning he decided to ride out, the desert unusually quiet. He packed his few things while Mara stood watching, her face composed, but her hands trembling just slightly, and he told her he would go far, far enough that the past could not follow, and that perhaps one day he would return when the dust had settled, and Mara nodded, accepting the words though they felt thin against the weight of what they shared, and as Jonah mounted his horse and turned back for one last look, he saw tears finally slip down her face, silent and shining, and in that moment he understood the cruel truth that love did not always arrive to stay. Sometimes it came only to test the heart, and as he rode away under the burning western sun, with Red Mesa shrinking behind him, Mara stood alone at the edge of her porch, wondering whether she had just saved a life or lost the only chance she had dared to want, and the desert offered no answers, only silence stretching endlessly ahead. Deadwood Crossing lay stretched beneath a hard gray sky, its buildings leaning like tired men who had given up standing straight, and when the rider appeared on the ridge just before noon, few noticed at first, because hope had long since learned not to live there, yet the horse moved slow and steady, not the gait of an outlaw or a drifter looking for trouble, and when the rider came closer the town saw a man worn thin by years and regret, his coat faded, his shoulders stiff with old pain, and pinned beneath the dust on his chest was a badge dulled by time, a marshal's star that caught the light only faintly, and Eli Garner felt the weight of every mile he had ridden to reach this place, for Deadwood Crossing was the last town he had sworn never to return to, the place where his belief in law had broken alongside his heart, and as he dismounted near the empty sheriff's office, boots touching dirt that remembered his failure, memories stirred uninvited, the sound of gunfire long past, the cries he had been unable to answer in time, and though the town had changed little, he had changed enough to know he was no hero riding in to save the day, only a man too tired to keep running from what he owed, and people watched from behind windows and door frames, their eyes carrying suspicion sharpened by years of being forgotten, because Deadwood Crossing had been without real law since the night the old marshal died and the gang took over, a slow, quiet takeover marked by fear rather than open war, and Eli knew their names even if they did not know his, because he had once sworn to stop them and failed, and the badge on his chest was not a symbol of pride but a reminder of a promise broken, and when he pushed open the door to the sheriff's office, the hinges screamed like a warning, dust swirling in the thin light, and he stood there breathing in the emptiness, remembering the day he had last worn that badge with confidence, back when his wife still waited for him at night and believed he could change the world one town at a time, and now she was gone, buried far from here, another cost of the road and the choices he had made. And as Eli stepped back outside, a small group had gathered, men and women with faces hardened by survival, and one of them asked quietly if he was staying, and Eli hesitated, because staying meant facing the men who had broken this town, meant facing the memory of the night he had ridden out wounded and ashamed, leaving Deadwood Crossing to its fate, and yet he answered yes, because sometimes staying was the only way to begin again, and news traveled fast despite the town's tired silence, reaching the ears of the men who now called themselves kings of Deadwood Crossing, men who laughed at the idea of law returning on a broken horse with a broken marshal, and that night Eli sat alone in the office, cleaning his revolver with hands steady despite the ache in his bones, listening to the sounds of the town settling into uneasy sleep, knowing that by morning lines would be drawn whether he wanted them or not. And dawn came with a tension that tasted like iron, the streets too quiet, the air too still, and when the gang's riders appeared at the edge of town, dust rising behind them like a promise of trouble, Eli stepped out to meet them, not with threats or speeches, but with a calm born of having nothing left to lose, and the leader, a man named Caldwell whose smile never reached his eyes, mocked the badge and the man wearing it, reminding Eli of how he had failed before, how he had left good people to suffer, and each word struck true, because Eli had replayed those moments in his mind for years, and yet he stood his ground, because guilt could either crush a man or hold him in place long enough to do something right, and he told Caldwell that Deadwood Crossing would no longer belong to fear, that law might arrive late but it still arrived, and laughter followed, harsh and sharp, but beneath it was uncertainty, because even broken men can be dangerous when they stop running, and the days that followed were filled with preparation, Eli repairing doors, speaking quietly with townsfolk, urging them not to fight unless they must, because he had seen what war did to people who only wanted peace, and at night he dreamed of the past, of the night everything fell apart, when he had been outnumbered and made the choice to save who he could by retreating, a choice that had haunted him ever since, and now the same test loomed, but this time he knew he would not ride away, even if it cost him what little he had left. And when the final confrontation came, it was not a sudden explosion of violence but a slow tightening, men facing each other in the street, hands near weapons, eyes locked, and the town holding its breath, and Eli felt fear, real and sharp, but beneath it was resolve, because redemption was not about winning, it was about standing where you once fell, and when the first shot rang out it shattered the stillness, and chaos followed in a blur of movement and sound, but through it all Eli moved with purpose, protecting where he could, pushing the fight away from the homes and into the open, taking hits and giving ground only to reclaim it, and though the cost was heavy and the danger real, something shifted, because the townsfolk saw a man who would not abandon them again, and that mattered more than numbers, and when the dust finally settled and the gang retreated, wounded pride dragging them away from a town that refused to bow any longer, Eli stood alone in the street, breathing hard, blood seeping through his coat, unsure if he had won or merely delayed the inevitable, and as people gathered around him, gratitude mixed with fear for what might still come, Eli knew Deadwood Crossing was not saved yet, that law was not restored with a single stand, but as he looked at the badge on his chest, now scratched and darkened, he felt something he had not felt in years, not pride, but peace, because for the first time since his failure, he had stayed, and as night fell and the town lit its lamps one by one, Eli wondered if this place might yet become home, or if his road still stretched onward, and in that uncertainty, with enemies not fully gone and wounds not fully healed, the future of Deadwood Crossing waited, balanced between hope and the ghosts that refused to rest. Black Canyon cut through the earth like a wound that never healed, its jagged walls swallowing light and sound, and it was there, beneath a sky the color of ash, that Samuel Crow first unfolded the map with hands that trembled from hunger more than fear. For Samuel was a man worn thin by bad luck and long roads, a prospector who had chased rumors across half the West only to arrive too late or leave with nothing, and when he found the map tucked inside an old journal bought for pennies from a dying man, he felt something stir that was not hope but desperation sharpened into belief, because the journal spoke of a vein of gold deep in Black Canyon, richer than anything ever pulled from the earth, guarded not by men but by a curse whispered to be older than the land itself, and Samuel told himself curses were stories made to scare the weak, yet as he rode toward the canyon the air seemed heavier, the desert stretching silent and watchful. And by the second night he heard the whispers, faint at first like wind slipping through cracks in stone, calling his name in a voice that sounded almost kind, promising rest, promising reward, and Samuel tightened his grip on the reins, reminding himself that loneliness could make a man hear things, that the desert played tricks on those who walked it alone, but the whispers followed him even when the wind died, growing clearer as Black Canyon rose before him like a dark mouth waiting to speak. And when he reached its edge the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that twisted along the canyon walls, and Samuel felt a chill despite the heat, a sense that he had crossed an unseen line, and as he descended carefully, following the map's markings, the whispers changed, no longer gentle but urgent, telling him he was close, telling him he deserved what waited below, because he had suffered enough, because the world owed him something in return, and those words struck deep, for Samuel carried years of disappointment like stones in his chest, the memory of promises broken by men and fortune alike, and by the time he reached the narrow ledge where the map ended, the whispers were everywhere, echoing off the stone, wrapping around his thoughts until it was hard to tell where they ended and his own began, and there, half hidden behind a curtain of rock, he found the vein, gold glinting faintly even in the low light, more than he had ever dreamed, and his breath caught as awe pushed aside doubt, because in that moment the curse felt small compared to the chance to finally be seen, to finally matter, and as he struck the rock with his pick the sound rang sharp and loud, and the canyon answered with a low rumble like distant thunder, but Samuel kept working, driven by a force that felt larger than choice, and each strike brought more gold and more whispers, now closer, now clearer, voices that sounded like old friends, like family long gone, telling him he was doing the right thing, telling him to take it all, and hours passed unnoticed until his hands bled and his muscles screamed. Yet he did not stop until the gold lay heavy in his pack and the whispers fell suddenly silent, replaced by a deep, unnatural stillness that pressed in from all sides, and in that silence Samuel felt the first true fear, because silence in Black Canyon felt like judgment, and when he turned to leave he found the path behind him altered, shadows thick where there had been light. The way out no longer clear, and as he climbed the canyon seemed to stretch and narrow at once, distances bending strangely, and the whispers returned, no longer kind, now demanding, reminding him of what he had taken and what was owed in return, and Samuel realized then that the price was not gold or blood alone but something quieter and more lasting, because with every step his memories blurred, faces he loved fading at the edges, the sound of his own name slipping away, and panic set in as he tried to recall why he had come, who he had been before the map, and the canyon fed on that fear, the whispers growing louder, sharper, accusing him of greed, of weakness, of thinking he deserved more than others, and Samuel cried out for the first time in years, his voice swallowed by stone, and when at last he stumbled out into the open desert, dawn breaking pale and cold, he collapsed, clutching the pack of gold like an anchor to himself, and for a moment he believed he had won, that he had escaped the curse, but as the sun rose he realized he could not remember the faces of his parents, could not remember the town where he was born, could not even remember the sound of laughter, and though the gold was real, heavy and bright, it felt colder than stone, and as Samuel made his way toward the nearest settlement, people began to notice something wrong, the way his eyes seemed distant, the way he hesitated before simple words, and though he paid for food and lodging with pieces of gold that made men stare in wonder, he could not explain where it came from, could not explain who he was. Beyond a name that felt borrowed, and at night the whispers returned, softer now, reminding him that the gold was still hungry, that Black Canyon never truly let go of what it touched, and Samuel understood then that the devil's gold did not kill quickly or violently, it hollowed a man out slowly, leaving him rich in things that could not love him and poor in everything else, and weeks later when Samuel vanished from the edge of town, leaving behind only a small pouch of gold and a map burned nearly to ash, some said he had returned to the canyon, drawn back by voices only he could hear, while others claimed he simply walked into the desert until his memories were gone and his body followed, and Black Canyon remained where it always had, dark and patient, its curse living on not in fire or blood but in the quiet truth that some riches cost more than a man can ever afford to lose, and when the wind moves through the canyon at dusk, carrying whispers across the sand, those who listen closely swear they hear a warning woven through the promises, a reminder that the devil's gold always finds someone desperate enough to believe.